Hey everyone, I want you to buy this book, America and the Mystery of Christ and the Church by David L. Schindler, with an introduction by our own Reuben Slife. David L. Schindler is the foundational critic of liberalism. He is the American theologian. He's been praised by none other than Pope Benedict XVI as such. And his work specifically on America formed this marvelous debate in the pages of First Things between neoconservatives and him, and the position that he was holding that later would become called post-liberalism. But it has never been treated in this fashion. So this book collects all of his writings on America, and Reuben here introduces these writings in a masterful way. So some people have heard of David L. Schindler and have worried because he plumbs the metaphysical depths of what it means to be an American. And Reuben's there in a marvelous 100-page introduction to guide us along and to really bring out with clarity his thought. It's the perfect book for America's 250th birthday. It's a perfect book to kind of reflect as you read on the question of why is it so difficult to be a Catholic in America, but more importantly, why is it so difficult to be holy in America? What specifically about our wonderful country makes Christianity such a unique problem? So I encourage you all to buy it. You can buy it right now, newpolity.com/press. It's a beautiful book, and I guarantee it will change your life. So buy it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polity's podcast. I'm here with Reuben Slife. Reuben, hello.
Hello.
And we are just tingling with anticipation of the 250th birthday of our dear country. America, that is, in case anyone was confused. And what better way to celebrate than to look at some of the words of the popes to America, which is something that I think a lot of folks don't realize has been happening for all the publicity that current statements from our dear Holy Father Leo get, that actually the popes have been speaking to America for quite some time. It's one of their jobs, as it were. And you have a little more knowledge of this.
Yes.
You're aware of the papal evaluation of the United States.
There's quite a lot of it.
Yeah. And I wonder why it is that we don't consider it. It seems like there hasn't necessarily been an understanding of ourselves as a nation on view, as it were, seen by the universal church, by the apostles.
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, there's when one is a pastor, what is one a pastor of? You know, are you a pastor of individuals, or are you? People might think of it as a pastor of the whole church. He's telling the whole church what they need to know, or are you a pastor of groups of people? I mean, it seems to me at some level obvious you're a pastor of groups of people, right? Because a priest who's the pastor of a parish is in charge of the parish as a whole. He's shepherding. I mean, you shepherd a flock, right? You try to get them all moving in the same direction as one. And you're obviously a pastor of individuals because you don't want individuals to be lost, but you want them to be part of the whole body. And maybe there's something about America in the way we obviously think of ourselves as having a national character, but we also think of ourselves, democratically. So we're kind of an assemblage of a bunch of individuals. Mm. So we don't think of ourselves as having a corporate existence. Mm-hmm. And so papal statements to us, as a corporate thing, don't seem to register in the same way. We don't think of the popes as guiding like the life of the American church or the American people. Those just aren't, I think, the terms in which we think about the Pope or about America exactly.
Yeah, and it does seem like there is something unique in this, and it actually becomes the subject of some of the Pope's letters to America. We're going to start today with Pope Leo.
Leo XIII, that is.
The 13th, that's right. And there's good reason for this, I presume. You're the one that sent me all of Pope Leo XIII's things to America.
So I'm supposed to tell you what the reason is?
Yeah.
Well, Leo XIII, for those who might not know, was Pope from 1878 to 1903. So he was pope for a very long time. So at that point, the United States was coming into its own sort of for the first time. You have in this period, the Spanish wave, the U.S. Civil War has just happened. And the U.S. being sort of consolidated as one thing begins to really expand on the world stage in a new way. You have the Spanish-American War going on, where the U.S. takes over the Philippines from Spain, a Catholic country. That's a major incident. There are, of course, other things you could name. But obviously also the church in the United States is growing. It was not really too terribly much earlier, historically considered, because the United States is fairly young, that there was a hierarchy of bishops established in the United States. So there are many more dioceses being created by Leo. I think Leo created the greatest number of dioceses in the United States of any pope. And then you have the Third Council of Baltimore happens right at the beginning of his tenure as pope. He's the one who officially convokes it, which was the most significant of the Baltimore councils. Of course, everyone knows the Baltimore Catechism coming out of the Third Council of Baltimore. So it was a major period for the growth of the church in the United States, and also a major period for the growth of the United States on the world stage. And Leo has a couple letters to the United States or the U.S. bishops at large. The three best known of these are Longinqua Oceani from 1895, which is does he give an occasion for this, or does he just send it? I think he just sends it. It's kind of talking about the whole U.S. church and the history of the country and, where they are now, what's going on. And then he has another one kind of like that right at the end of his papacy in 1902 called In Amplissimo, which is a response to the U.S. bishop sending him greetings on the 25th year beginning of his, so the end of the 24th year. Yeah. Beginning of the 25th of his papacy.
Yeah, it's quite a milestone for a pope.
Quite a milestone. It's a long time. John Paul II was pope for 27 years, and Leo was pope for about 25. So for that period in history, a very long time. And then there's another letter, which is the most significant one, in the middle, 1899, called Testem Benevolentia. Mm-hmm. And this is really the reason probably why we're talking about Leo XIII, because this is a letter he sends to Cardinal James Gibbons, the Archbishop of Baltimore, which was the first see in the United States. And so he was, Gibbons was a major figure himself. I think he was a bishop for 50 years, and he was just the man in charge of the Church of the United States. I think after that point, the decision was kind of made, we're never going to let an American bishop be that prominent again. And anyway, so Leo sent most of his letters to Gibbons. That's just the way they did it back then. And this one's to Gibbons, and it's on what Leo refers to as Americanism. Mm-hmm. He doesn't make up the term, actually. We'll get around to that. Nor does he, I think, exactly call it a heresy, though that's the word that's gotten associated with it across the years. But he's condemning various ideas that go by the name of Americanism. Right. And this was sort of an earthquake at the time. And that's the reason why we're talking about Leo, really. Yeah. It's a historical event of importance for the U.S. church, and it's not everyone has a heresy or something, at least next door to a heresy, named after their country.
Slovenianism. Yeah, not really. Yeah, although before maybe jumping into the critique, and maybe this is not the moment in history to kind of take a placid view of things, but I just think it's really wonderful that you can get, as a nation, a critique. I don't know. I mean it. Like, you go through life so often, and you're kind of giving it your best shot. You're doing what you think you should do.
And no one's telling you how it's working out.
No one tells you, really. Are you doing all right? And then here in the church, one of the most marvelous things, I've been experiencing this with Pope Leo XIV's recent Magnificat Humanitas, of course, the encyclical that's giving us some guidance on the age of AI. And I've been to a few like interfaith meetings, and there's been this description coming from Mormons and from evangelicals and Jews. They keep on describing having a certain holy envy, they call it, for the Catholics, because we have a pope that can look at the world in this, in this contemporary instance, and provide some authority, provide a critique, say, hey, you guys, you're going off the rails here, you're doing all right there. And it just seems like a thing we actually desire. Like if you look at what people do, especially nations, is that we work hard to live, but then ultimately we try to take all of that life and shared life and produce some result, some fruit, some cultural object, some whatever it is. We aren't content just to survive. We would like to be admired. We'd like to be recognized. But that also means we would like to risk critique.
Yeah, everybody wants to be noticed, and everybody could use some feedback.
I know, and sometimes I think there's
Isn't it
this,
nice to have someone who can do those things?
Oh, I think it's marvelous. I mean, I think the idea of, I think if we're honest about what drives life forward, I think a certain performance, like the sense of being before others, looking for admiration, is not, it's not like a weakness or something to get over. Some people speak about this as if the real desire, having already figured out the good life, is to sort of stay under the radar of any critique and to never really be noticed. But then, of course, this involves you in these self-reflective cycles where you desire to be noticed in your desire not to be noticed. Look how you want someone to affirm you that you are living the good life, flying under the radar. So I think with some abashment, is that a word?
No.
I didn't think so. For having a heresy attached to our country's name, Americanism. At the same time, come on, getting that kind of recognition.
Well, we were really putting ourselves out there.
Well, that's for sure.
That's what we do.
Now, I will say, though, it surprised me, having known a little bit about Americanism, to find that it's actually couched within, in that first letter you mentioned, and then in the critique itself, it's couched within a real praise for this country. I mean, the Pope likes us. Sorry, the Pope liked us. Speaking about Leo XIII, I realize I'm jumping, and that's hard enough when there's two Leos. But it really was couched within some real compliments that I do not think were just sort of warming the pan for the eventual critique. Is that the sense you get for like what is the Pope? What does the Pope like about America when he writes that first letter?
Yeah, I was listening to Bishop Barron give a homily the other day, as many people in this country of ours do.
Friends?
And he was talking about the reading we had a little while ago on a Sunday about the apostles, the 12 apostles, and pointing out that Jesus calls all of them. Why does he do this? You can look at it and say, well, obviously he's the creator. He's going to make something out of these guys. He's calling them to be something they're not. And at some level, that's true. But he's also, he is, as I just said, the creator. He already made them. He made them for the thing he's calling them to. Mm-hmm. And so you can say that when Jesus is walking along the seashore and sees, Peter, James, and John, and calls them, he's seeing something in them. I mean, that's where Bishop Barron was going with it. And I think this is you can relate this to even the book of Genesis, that God looks on what he makes and sees that it's good. I mean, what is the, we always say that, God loves us, but what is the first step of love? The way John Paul II talks about this, say in Love and Responsibility, that there are sort of layers of love. And the first one he calls amor complacentia, which is really impossible to translate. But it's the love which just, it gets translated as, I think, love as fondness. But it's the love that looks at a thing and just likes looking at it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, this is just fundamental for every sort of love. I mean, love of children, romantic love, even love of friends in a way that's not only looking, it's just like you appreciate that the person exists. And, without that, there's just, you mentioned that like desire people have to be noticed. And I think that's really the fundamental aspect of it. Like, is it just good that I am?
Yeah.
And you get that from people noticing. And it's way before they notice the things you do, though that's important too. I don't know. In a certain way, I think it would be a mistake to read some of the Pope's compliments as though they're on the same level as the negatives. And I don't just mean that they're more fundamental. I mean that it's you sometimes get people reading positive things the Pope says about your country as though like, well, but look, no, he's being very positive here. It's like, well, yes, but I don't think that's at the level of evaluation. Sure. That comes before evaluation in a way. I mean, some of it, is evaluation. You're doing this well, you're not doing that so well. But I think it's just, it's sort of like Christ seeing the disciples in the seashore and going, I like what you have going on. Come with me, or just looking at someone and saying it's valuable that you exist. It's good that you are. I like. There's a basic delight there. Yeah. And the Pope as the universal father, I think has some of this.
Yeah, and probably a fondness. That's very desired for a nation that's still, and even more so then, unsure of its right to exist. I mean, something that people don't necessarily get about America, because you see our posturing and our status abroad as this like utterly self-absorbed, confident that we ought to exist. But of course, in human life, someone only ever acts like that if they're a little bit worried that maybe they don't have a right to be there. And I think, especially when you consider the history of Catholicism of the church in America, there's this real sense of, okay, ought we be here? Are we not just more Europe? Are we really just some kind of European power playing over in this new land? So I think part of the fondness of the Pope for America, when he praises its activity, praises its saints, its sort of nascent holiness, and praises its clear desire to give to the church. That it is, I think it feels good, and probably felt really good to those receiving the letter to be seen as just like really existing as a nation and really existing as it's a paradox, I guess, but like it's precisely when the universal notices you as the particular that you kind of exist properly.
Yeah, and I think there's a fondness or delight not just in like in a sort of generic way. It's good that you are, but the specifics. The Pope sees many countries. Sure. Yeah. And the countries are different, and so I think you look at the differences and you like them, you appreciate it. Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily the same thing as an evaluation. Like, what in this thing is going well and what's going wrong, and at what level does this? It's just like, hey, look at that. That's a nice thing. Without the evaluation. That's how the sort of basic the love of delight or fondness is. You evaluate later, and it may be that certain of the things which you saw and liked quite a lot, you look at it a little harder and go, there are some problems there. But then you want to fix the problems because you like the thing,
Right.
And he does have, I don't know how clearly I marked them, and it's a bit of a lengthy text. So if you have particular things you recall,
got my notes. Oh no, those are the Americanist heresy ones. Sorry.
I mean, he starts here with, we are resolved to speak to you separately, by which he means directly, individually, the United States. To this we apply ourselves with the utmost zeal and care, because we highly esteem and love exceedingly the young and vigorous American nation, in which we plainly discern latent forces for the advancement alike of civilization and of Christianity. Which is the sort of thing we like to say about ourselves, And actually it's a little bit of what got us in trouble later with Americanism.
Yeah.
The idea that we're going to advance civilization and Christianity. And yet the Pope does say, I plainly discern. He does say he plainly discerns latent forces. I don't know if that's a compliment exactly. Yeah. I plainly discern that these forces are latent.
Well, in the same,
I wouldn't read it like that necessarily.
No, in the same letter, he describes, calls on us to remember Columbus and to remember that he had a mission of opening up a path for the faith to spread through the new world. And in there, he describes the America as a little baby, as a child, feebly crying, and that at that time, the church, the language he uses is took this nascent church to its bosom. Describes the church as a mother. And so I think it is occasioned a little bit by that's your past. Remember what the church has done for you, which I think is particularly important because it's in the same letter that he gives a critique is maybe too strong, but this warning to not universalize the very particular nature of our church-state relations that we seem to have established. So he says in that letter that it would be very erroneous to draw the conclusion, based on all the good things that he sees in America. He said it'd be very erroneous to draw the conclusion that in America is to be sought the type of the most desirable status of the church, or that it would be universally lawful or expedient for state and church to be, as in America, dissevered and divorced. He then goes on to say, this is the right letter?
Yep,
right?
yep.
He goes on to say that in addition to liberty, so he's acknowledging that there's a liberty to the church that is allowing it to act with vigor, which if you know Europe at the time, you could see how there might be a little bit of envy for a free kind of open land where you can move. My gosh. But he says that, in addition to liberty, it would be right for the church not simply to be left alone, but to be favored and patronized by the political power, and to be publicly acknowledged, which is, of course, not a direction that we followed, or at least didn't happen that way.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say, whether it's a thing that you can just follow.
Oh, sure.
He seems more concerned about the way we think than with what we do in a way, because, Catholics are a minority in the country, and man, I don't want to sound like I'm endorsing the thesis hypothesis model of church-state relations, but he might have been a little bit. Yeah. He, in relation to things in America that are new, he is talking about education, talks about the Catholic University of America that he was involved in establishing, and says, an education cannot be deemed complete which takes no notice of modern sciences. Mm-hmm. It is obvious that in the existing keen competition of talents and the widespread and in itself noble and praiseworthy passion for knowledge, Catholics ought to be not followers but leaders. It is necessary, therefore, that they should cultivate every refinement of learning and zealously train their minds to the discovery of truth and the investigation, so far as it is possible, of the entire domain of nature. Mm-hmm. You can see how this passage very likely had an influence on the whole development of American Catholic universities, and even the way they kind of tended to become just like other universities. Sure.
Yeah, and I do think there's this awareness, even in this letter, of certain, extremes of American and Protestant thought. And here you can see the kind of attempt to take what's good in the Baconian vision and in the country's sort of all-out promotion of the sciences, and in an effort to say, okay, we need to be a part of that. Like, we can't just say, no, we're Catholics, so we just do theology or something like that. But we actually need to lead within this pursuit of knowledge. In a similar way, there's the church-state relations, which are sort of unique. And the Pope's concern is that we don't take ourselves as having found the secret of church-state relations. So he's not prescribing a particular way. He's saying you have something particular here.
And it's working out pretty well.
Working out, but do not mistake the, don't mistake what you've been given in the history and the reality you're working with simply what ought to be done everywhere, which I think is important to realize that the Pope already has, and probably has this with every country, this inkling that there's a temptation to absolutize the experience of your nation, which is exactly what you see going forward, is our church-state relations ought to be all church-state relations. Our, pursuit of science as like the chief goal of the university simply is education. These sorts of things tend to be absolutized in American thought. And maybe that's just how it goes, like every nation faces the temptation of thinking themselves as the universal church instead of a nation.
Yep. Yeah.
I think it was in that letter too, before we move on, that he critiques divorce.
Yes.
Which I couldn't help but read in his resonating with his previous warning not to take the state of divorce or disseverance between church and state as a normal universal way of conceiving the relationship. He then, towards the end of the letter, warns us against actual divorce within marriage, and I think shows a real spiritual sensitivity to maybe not. I'm not saying he like brought it all to thought. I'm not saying these are like propositions of what's going on in the American mind, but I think we do have a tendency to divorce things, to take things that belong together and then treat them separately. Maybe if we try to combine them back together, not actually taking relationship as being integral or primary, but taking it as a subsequent, thing achieved by fundamentally separated individuals. It seems like he has some sense for this going on.
Yeah. I mean, this is the difficulty of reading, papal documents of any sort, because they're not trying to say everything.
Sure, yeah.
But it's easy to slip into reading them as like, well, the Pope said X, so X must be absolutely right, But it's the Pope is a person; he talks like a person. But specifically, it's a difficulty of reading a Pope from the past, and Leo XIII is a particular case because he gets sometimes treated as like the mega Pope, the last. Almost like the last Pope who said things the way they really are, because he's got that good old Latin style. In this passage, he talks about the thing he says is not good is the church and state being dissevered and divorced. He says, for example, nothing about religious freedom. Or in what way you might understand it or might not understand it. But we as Americans tend to think of separation of church and state as the same thing as religious freedom. And so when we hear the church and state should not be dissevered and divorced, we tend to go, well, oh goodness, should the other people should we be oppressing them? Like, is that what the Pope wants? And, the language does not say everything you might want said, just because A, that's not how language works, but B, because it was written in 1895. And a lot of stuff has gone on since 1895. But yes, there does seem to be, I think the language of dissevered and divorced is significant, and he does bring up divorce again, you're right, like literal divorce. I'm not sure what the state of U.S. law on divorce at the time was. One thing he's on about in the letter as a whole is also the papal care for the country. That education is good, modern education or modern knowledge is good. I want a university established in Washington D.C. for this. we're working on it. Recently, he says we've established an American legation, which is sort of like what we have now with the nuncio, but back then they didn't have the diplomatic relations of that sort yet. So it was the Pope's representative to the bishops, not really to the country at that point. And so he goes through the way in which this is good for the bishops and good for the American Catholics to have stronger ties with the Pope. So he's again and again talking about the ways in which the church is working to firm up the country and the way in which the Pope is working to firm up the church. And so there is a sort of, if you will, anti-divorce kind of sentiment throughout the whole thing, talking about how, I particularly found it interesting when he's talking about the legate. He says he's going to execute the mandates and interpret the will of the pontiff who sends him. And what is this going to do, he says? For the bishops, he says it's going to help preserve mutual charity and an intimate union of souls between them. This union, so salutary and desirable, consists mainly in harmony of thought and action, as I say, the good old Latin style. Talks about the concord of the bishops and the edification the force of this example will have. This sounds sort of like stuff we've heard over the past 15-ish years about the U.S. bishops being united and, even synodality to some degree. We got to be together on the path, moving together, walking together.
Yeah.
And, it's as you say, sort of anti-divorce.
Yeah.
Like, be on the same page.
Be of one mind, brothers.
Be of one mind,
St.
as
Paul.
St. Paul and Peter keep saying in the New Testament.
And certainly the difficult thing in America, again, not saying that that's what the Pope was observing directly, but in America especially, there is a difficulty of unity, of establishing unity, because largely we believe that we already have it. We already have a sort of unity as Americans that already is much more like a unity of faith than in the Catholic nations that the Pope is writing, right? Like,
we're a nation founded on an idea. Yeah,
exactly, which has this resemblance to the gospel, like the kind of unity. What I mean is, if you're French, if you're Norwegian, you have a certain unity in your people that you can presume, and then you can have disagreements of ideas. You can go this way or that way, and have to be called to a greater unity. But in America, as everyone knows, you arrive, and you don't presume. You don't rise up from a pre-existing unity as a people, but you somehow affirm your unity on the level of idea. Especially in those early days, I'm sure that was having a couple hundred years at least makes it easier. And so it does seem like there's I don't know what the word is, like a particular need for that unity that comes from Christ, the unity that is guarded and preserved by the papacy, to be affirmed as necessary. Like you have to stay aboard the ship here, even prior to some particular heresy or particular concern.
Right. And I think maybe to some degree, as Americans, we have a tendency to, because of the way we think about like a national unity in terms of, we talk about ourselves being a proposition country, a nation founded on ideas. We tend to locate unity in the ideas and then say, well, other than that, we can differ on what we think, and we can also, we don't necessarily have to get along and all this kind of stuff. Because we wish very much to have the sort of democratic, everyone's an individual doing their own thing. And that's almost part of the idea. And in the church, I think, as I was saying, what I was trying to say is that we have a tendency on that basis to think of the church in the same way, where you have the unity of the faith, and then everything else is just free game. Whereas that's not what it is. I mean, as you point out, St. Paul says, be of one mind, and the bond of charity and all these sorts of things, which are much more granular. They aren't, it isn't just agree on the faith.
Yeah, right.
It's agree. It isn't just agree on the faith, it's love each other. And this is maybe a dimension of Christianity which we tend to forget because it's not the way we conceive of, as you say, we tend to make our country the universal church, not the way we conceive of our country.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Okay, so now shall we look at Americanism? Anything else you want to send that particular letter off with?
No, I don't think so. Maybe say a word about In Amplissimo, because it's kind of similar, the one at the end of his papacy, where he says, I just think this is it's funny how little the United States has changed in some ways. Finally, not to omit the expression of our gratitude, we would have you know what satisfaction you have caused us by the liberality with which your people are endeavoring to contribute by their offerings to relieve the penury of the Holy See. In other words, thanks for sending us so much money, which to this day is like the U.S. church is one of the main funders of mission work and all kinds of things, and specifically the Vatican. So from 1902 to 2026, I just find that, you can look at the stuff from a long time ago and think, well, it was really different back then. And in many ways it was, but also, I don't know. Some things never change, I guess. Well,
we did have a lot of resources even then, and then only more after the World Wars. So I don't know how long that'll keep up, but we'll keep sending it, Leo.
So, Americanism, Testem Benevolentia.
Yeah.
How do we want to get into this?
Well, maybe, you've written a bit about this.
I have written in this book here.
Which everyone should get. So this is America in the Mystery of Christ and the Church. It's a collection of essays by D.L. Schindler, masterfully introduced by Reuben, where you really do make some headway, I think, into the Americanist controversy. Not that anyone was asking for it in 2026, but there you are. And so perhaps you could begin by describing the lack of understanding of this critique of Americanism when it occurred from the papacy, because I don't think it would do it justice to begin by describing what Americanism is without the massive elephant in the room is that no one thought it was going on, apparently, except the Pope.
Well, yes, it's funny because at the time when this letter came down, it was, as I said at the beginning, kind of an earthquake, but it was also, if such a thing can be, an earthquake no one noticed. Like if in the 1950s you had asked, which was, 50 years later, so there would have been people alive still, who were alive at the time. If you asked people, well, what about the letter on Americanism? It's my understanding that most people had never heard of it. It's kind of got a folk reputation these days, but it kind of just slipped away. It cast a long shadow in a certain way. Like my understanding is that people in faculties and that kind of thing, scholars, got a little nervous after the Americanism thing, and then modernism happens right after that with Pius X. And so there was this sort of like, don't say anything that might sound too novel going on in universities, but it was a little suppressed.
The letter itself.
The letter itself, because it was sent to Cardinal Gibbons.
But he was told to promulgate it.
He did, but I don't think it was widely published at the time in the United States. I'm not an expert on those details, so I may be wrong about that. But I don't think it really entered into like general consciousness of the American church that this occurred. The bishops, some of them were kind of spooked by it. which would require me giving a little background to how it happened. But yes, I mean, the reception of this document is really pretty interesting. Obviously, when the Pope sends you a letter, what do? You do what you do when anyone sends you a letter. You send him a letter back. And so various bishops in the United States sent him letters back. Gibbons himself, I'll maybe get to the other letters later, but Gibbons himself wrote a letter back later than most other bishops. He waited for a while. He says in the letter that he waited to see what was how it was going to be received, and his letter was not published at the time. The Vatican's newspaper was generally publishing responses people sent. They did not publish Gibbons' response, though who knows exactly why. I mean, researchers say they've been unable to find any copy of this letter in the Vatican's archives. So maybe they just didn't receive it. Maybe it got lost in the mail. Someone eventually dug up a copy of the letter in the archives in the Archdiocese of Baltimore and published it in 1944. So 45 years later. Gibbons says, "Most Holy Father, the letter in which Your Holiness disapproves of the errors that certain people have called Americanism reached me in the middle of February. I had an English translation made, which I published at the same time as the Latin text. My feelings are too well known to Your Holiness for me to need to tell you that I thank you from the bottom of my heart for having shed light on all these questions, which outside the United States, certain minds seem to take pleasure in confusing for a year. I have to mention in a moment that the controversy largely went on in France, actually, but which in our country did not occupy public opinion at all. This doctrine, which I would gladly call extravagant and absurd, this Americanism, as it has been called, has nothing in common with American views, aspirations, doctrines, and conduct. I don't think that in the whole country one could find a bishop, a priest, or even a layman educated in his religion who ever put forward such enormities. No, this is not, never has been, never will be our Americanism. I am deeply grateful to Your Holiness for having made this distinction in your apostolic letter." He distinguishes, two senses in which you could mean the word. We'll get to that. He talks about why he was delayed in writing. I'm happy, Most Holy Father, to be able to tell Your Holiness that the sentiments that have been expressed have been those of deepest respect for the pontifical word, of lively gratitude for the benevolence you have shown us, and of sincere appreciation for the distinction that Your Holiness so rightly distinguishes between the doctrines we reprobate, along with Your Holiness, and those sentiments of love for our country and its institutions, which we share with our fellow citizens. I left out a clause because it's a little grammatically strange. I'm happy to tell you the sentiments that have been expressed here in the country are the ones I just listed, mingled with a certain astonishment that such doctrines could be attributed to American Catholics. So Gibbons, this was sort of a trend among the bishops, though Gibbons' letter is balder than some of the others and saying, yeah, oh man, we condemn that. But that's not happening here.
Yep.
No one who knows could possibly think that was happening here. And this has become the received opinion of Americanism. I mean, if you've ever heard of it, you've probably heard of it as the Phantom Heresy. And I mean, there is a little bit to be said for that. A bit of the backstory here. There was a man named Isaac Hecker. He was a priest. He was the founder of the Paulists, the religious order. After his death, a biography was written of him. And this biography was translated into French. It was published in France with an introduction. And the book and the introduction caused an uproar in France about what are these novel opinions called Americanism that, allegedly Hecker held. And that led eventually to this letter. So the story that comes down is that, well, Hecker didn't really hold this. No one really held this. Maybe some people in France held it, to the point where I think it was Bishop John Ireland said that Leo told him in an audience that, it was really only in some diocese in France. That's the story that comes down. And so it is, in fact, a little difficult. One has to admit, it's a little difficult to identify what Leo says in the letter with specific things people were saying at the time. So there's a little bit of ambiguity there. At the same time, I think it is necessary to question the received story a little bit because there are some problems with it. One being, I haven't run this completely to ground yet, but I find it interesting. Where did the term phantom heresy come from? Well, the man, the Abbe Felix Klein, who translated the book into French, wrote the introduction. He didn't do this on his own. He was a friend with certain Americans, those being Bishop John Ireland, Archbishop John Ireland, who was the Archbishop of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Bishop John Joseph Keene, who at that point was the Bishop of Richmond, Virginia, and Dennis J. O'Connell, Father Dennis J. O'Connell, who was the rector at the Pontifical North American College in Rome. And they did, in fact, I'll return to this in a second, call themselves Americanists before this controversy broke out. So he wasn't doing this on his own. He was friends with them. The book, I believe, if I remember correctly, had an introduction by a preface by John Ireland. And Klein appears to be the one who invented the term phantom heresy. So even if you take the received story that this really was a problem in France, well, the man who was responsible for the French book is also the one who invented the term phantom heresy, so it appears. He wrote a memoir, a series of memoirs later in his life, and the one on, let me check my notes here to make sure I'm getting the verbiage correct. The book is called L'Americanism, une Heresy fantôme, Americanism, a Phantom Heresy, published in 1949. And that, however, is not the earliest usage of the term. I finally tracked down an earlier one. There was an essay published called The Genesis of Americanism by someone allegedly called J. St. Clair Etheridge, who appears to be a nom de plume. Yeah. But it was translated into French, and it was titled La Genèse de l'Americanisme, Histoire d'une Hérésie fantôme, History of a Phantom Heresy. And that was translated by a man named Georges Grappe at the instigation of Felix Klein. So that was 1903, maybe? I don't have the date marked here. So very early on, at the very time of the controversy, they were already calling it a Phantom Heresy. And it was the man who would later title his book that. So the term Phantom Heresy seems to be of French origin. So even if you take the story that this was really a problem in France, even the French were denying that it was a problem in France. And that's where the term Phantom Heresy came from. So as I say, there's some problems with the received story. Other problems would be that not all the bishops agreed that this was a Phantom Heresy. So back to responses letters they sent. The three people I mentioned calling themselves Americanists, Ireland and O'Connell and Keene. I don't think we have a response letter from O'Connell, but Keene and Ireland write in similar ways to Gibbons, though not quite to the extent of saying no one ever did this here. Though they say, we totally accept this, we condemn it too. And give the impression that it's not really a big deal. But not all the bishops in the United States did that. One of them, Corrigan, who was sort of the conservative at the time, the hardliner, wrote a letter saying that Leo had accurately identified. That's not a quotation. That's the author of this book here. This is a quotation. The multiplicity of fallacies and errors which passed under the specious title of Americanism. And, quote, by reason of your infallible teaching, we will not have to transmit to our successors the ungrateful task of having to struggle with an enemy which perhaps would never die. So clearly implying that it's alive, it's here, and we thank you for extirpating it so our successors don't have to deal with this. Another bishop, Katzer, went further. He congratulated Leo for condemning the errors and said that he was from Milwaukee, that the bishops there indeed affirmed that they reprobated the aforesaid errors, but did not hesitate to... sorry, I misread this. They were indignant to find Americans, quote, who indeed affirmed that they reprobated the aforesaid errors, but who did not hesitate to proclaim again and again in Jansenistic fashion that there was hardly any American who had held them, and that the Holy See, deceived by false reports, had beaten the air and chased after a shadow, to use a popular expression. It can escape no loyal Catholic how injurious to the infallible See and how alien to the Orthodox faith such conduct is, since those erroneous opinions have been most assuredly and evidently proclaimed among us orally and in writing, though perhaps not always so openly. And no true Catholic can deny that the magisterium of the Church extends not only to the revealed truths, but also to the facts connected with dogma, and that it appertains to this teaching office to judge infallibly of the objective sense of any doctrine and of the existence of false opinions. Wow. As the author here remarks, Katzer's letter was, of course, a direct insult to Gibbon's Keene in Ireland. I'll say. Yeah. So that's one thing. The idea of the Phantom Heresy comes from some of the people involved in it. Yeah. Not all the bishops agreed, though, to be fair, some bishops sent letters saying, we condemn it, but we're not doing it. Other ones sent letters saying, some people were totally doing this. Do you understand that as a political maneuver? Maybe. Because they were not necessarily on team Ireland, Keene, yeah. O'Connell here. But about half the American bishops at least said nothing. They didn't respond. So telling what the general opinion of the American bishops at the time is impossible. In retrospect, there's just not historical evidence for that. But the third thing that makes this complicated is that Leo himself sent another letter to Bishop Keene. As I say, Keene was the bishop of Richmond. He was later appointed bishop of Dubuque, August 18th, 1900. So Testem Benevolentia on Americanism is 1899. Next year, he sends a letter appointing Keene bishop of Dubuque. And along with this letter, he sends a personal letter to Keene. I'm reading here from a biography of Keene. Leo exhorted Keene in the new career now opening before him to keep in mind the letter to Cardinal Gibbons on Americanism, in which he showed, as he said, quote, for many reasons which we mentioned there, the piety of the faithful was endangered. The Pope went on to say that these dangers must be combated by every means. Nor do we doubt, he continued, that you will work hard to suppress the errors spreading there, and to foster the union of souls with this infallible seat of truth. Keene then sat down, just some context on how people received this letter. Keene sat down and wrote a letter to Ireland, and says about the Pope, he simply reiterates the assertion made in the encyclical, which he calls it, Testem Benevolentia. And this at the very time he was virtually apologizing to you for it, saying it was needed only in France. It made me sick, and it was a painful blow to the cardinal too, Gibbons. But I have not told a living soul of it besides him. The biographer here says he apparently did talk about it to someone else. It was another man who wrote a letter in which he mentions it. He's clearly seen it. He writes, the letter reiterated and rubbed in the whole letter on Americanism. reasserted the existence of dangerous tendencies among American Catholics, insinuated plainly that Archbishop Keene himself was tainted by those tendencies, and called on him to devote himself and his energies to rooting them out of himself and his people. This is a very strong expression, perhaps, of what was contained in the letter. Perhaps someone will tell you that I've exaggerated, but it seems perfectly plain to me that anyone who knows how to read a pontifical letter will see all this clearly contained in it. Archbishop Keene himself admitted to me that he could see a complete reiteration and even an ill-natured insistence of all that was in the letter on Americanism.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, certainly just from that, any kind of idea of it simply being, I mean, you're right to say you have a certain care of this, and you're right to say we can't conclude, what was going on, definitely, but I think it's also right to say you can't conclude that there was nothing going on and that the Pope was shadowboxing.
Yeah, that seems right. I mean, I say this all for historical information. It's a very interesting episode.
Totally.
But it does have a reputation as a phantom heresy, which, as I say, there's a little bit of difficulty identifying what he says in the letter with what people were saying.
Yeah,
but at the same time, it's very hard to say it was a phantom heresy when you look at the historical things going on.
Yeah, and maybe a slightly less, much less historical look at this. It's like, well, heresy is not always that easy to pin down. I mean, you're talking about the life of people's spirit. You're talking about what they believe to some extent, but also how they act and what their behaviors are. I mean,
right.
And so there is of course, there's these moments in the church where it all comes to a head and you get like Luther on trial asking, do you affirm or deny this proposition? Okay. But the idea that that's the normal state of things and not the crisis point is silly. Like it seems like, are there tendencies in the church to go this way or that way? Yes. And if they are tendencies, would you expect them to be unequivocally and propositionally held such that you could say, here they are, this person has them?
Right. I mean, we have a very propositional idea of heresy, that it's only a heresy if you put it in print in the form of a proposition. Right.
I mean, like you read stuff from the early Middle Ages, heresy meant that you were like robbing people on the highways. It's just to confuse things a little.
No, I mean, it is true that, like, canonically speaking, yes, something only becomes a heresy if you're putting it in print. And as I say, he doesn't use the word heresy in here.
No, you're right.
But saying these people are preaching these propositions, and there's a tendency going on here, which I'm going to pick out with some propositions. They're not the same thing.
Sure.
And whether Leo knew that they weren't exactly the same thing, I don't know. But they're not the same thing.
But boy, I mean, maybe this is from the virtue of some hindsight and having read a lot of D.L. Schindler, or maybe not a lot of, more than most people, I guess, that there's, when I read the actual content, which I guess if you're listening to this, you might still be wondering what the content of Americanism exactly is.
We're getting there. The suspense is terrible.
I know. But it does seem to be things that maybe today we would all readily acknowledge, maybe not as historical, propositionally held beliefs. We don't know who is preaching what per se. But I mean, to me, that letter at points just read like a good examination of conscience. Like, look, you're a people. You have this particular, very novel, good set of historical circumstances given to you, and as a result, you have some clear tendencies to go off the rail in basically these 5 ways. And the idea that I would look at that and say, no one does this, no one thinks this. Absolutely not. No, it seemed very familiar to me, and personally, so it's hard to imagine it not being the case generally.
So before we get to the letter,
sure,
on as far as what he says Americanism is,
sure,
I think I should say a little bit more about what the other people were saying Americanism was that caused the letter. I mentioned Archbishop Ireland, Bishop Keene, and Father O'Connell. What were they doing? Mm-hmm. Well, so here's a speech that Father O'Connell gave He was, as I say, the rector of the Pontifical North American College in Rome, so he was in Europe. But he was writing letters back and forth with these guys. In 1897, so 2 years before the letter, he goes to Freiburg, in Switzerland, I think it is, and gave a talk at a conference called "A New Idea in the Life of Father Hecker." A new idea has recently appeared in a very important biography published in the city of New York, with the approbation of the Most Reverend M.A. Corrigan, who was, I mentioned, the bishop who then wrote the thing saying, "They're doing it here. Thank you for making it stop." So whatever this means, he approved the book, and lately put into French and introduced to the public by a very striking preface from the pen of the Abbé Klein of the Catholic Institute of Paris. So this is O'Connell fluffing the book. That biography is the life of the Very Reverend Father Hecker, founder of the Congregation of St. Paul, and the new idea is what is called by the name of Americanism. Not in one passage only or another is that term found, but the idea expressed in it shines like a golden thread from the beginning to the end of the volume, and gives to the work its character and its meaning. So, this is 2 years in advance, O'Connell, an American, saying, this book is important. It's important in the English version, not just the French version. And what's important about it is the idea of Americanism, which you can find on every page and gives the whole book meaning. And he goes on to define what he means by this. And he means it, he says, two ways, politically and ecclesially. Politically, he talks about the order of American government, the way American law gives everyone rights. He suggests maybe we should recast canon law on the basis of American law, not Roman law. And then ecclesially, he talks about the church-state relation in America. Now, this is after Longinque Oceani, where the Pope said, don't talk about that like it's the ideal. 2 years later, Dennis J. O'Connell is going around saying, I'm not on the right page here. Whatever be the theory, in practice the system seems to work as well as any other actual system we are acquainted with. However beautiful and true in theory may be the doctrine of the legal union of church and state, which I don't know that the Pope said legal union, but okay. However beautiful and true in theory the doctrine of the legal union of church and state may be, in practice it has unfortunately been found too often to work to the grave injury of the church by diminishing her liberty. Not entirely an unreasonable thing to think, but I think one can at least see how he's sailing a little close to the wind in this. I'll give you another example of the things these men, and they're using the term Americanism and applying it to themselves. You can find texts where they call themselves Americanists. Yeah. Now, I should back up. What does the word Americanism mean? We hear it used by the Pope and go, well, that just sounds like the name for a heresy. You take a something, you slap an ism on the end, and you're good. No, the word Americanism was just a word. We still use it sometimes if we're talking about linguistics. Like somebody uses a weird phrase.
It's an Americanism.
It's an Americanism. Yeah. You don't have that in British English. It's an Americanism. So it's a word that means like the qualities of being American, the American, I nearly said the American way, but the qualities, the characteristics, the sort of essence of Americanness is what we would say today. Yep. An Americanism. And so the reason why you have these people walking around calling themselves Americanists is because they're the sort of group in the church that says, no, we're in favor of the characteristics of America. Mm-hmm. That's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're in favor of the characteristics of America. What does that mean to them? Well, here he talks about it politically, he talks about it ecclesiastically. I think it's maybe a little vague. He's just saying, as Americans, we should be championing the uniqueness of our culture, our people, our system of government. We shouldn't be ashamed of it. We should want it to flourish. Okay. With that said, here's a letter written by O'Connell to John Ireland. This is 98, so the following year, 1 year before the letter. The Spanish-American War was going on. Ireland was kind of asked by the Pope, the Secretary of State at the Vatican, and all that, to see if he could get the war to stop. Go talk to the president or the various people, see what you can do. He couldn't do it. He was sorry about this because it was kind of a big blow, because he thought, well, if I can pull this off, I'm going to be a cardinal, So this is O'Connell writing to Ireland, private letter. My dear friend, I read your letters with the intensest interest, and I thank you cordially for them. It seems to me that you have now reached the providential period of your life. It seems to me that the culminating point where all your dreams are to be realized and all your poetic visions are to be turned into prophecies. People don't write like this anymore. I don't think this was so unusual back then. Letters were flowering.
Yeah, I'm reading the diary of Thomas Cole, the American landscape painter, and they wrote like this.
Now is a moment in which it will be utterly impossible for you to expand your power or your personality too much. For this were you born. For this you came into the world. To realize the dreams of your youth for America, and to be the instrument in the hands of Providence for spreading the benefits of a new civilization over the world. To this point has really tended, even without your knowing it, everything you have hitherto done in all the period of your activity. And now from this point you are to radiate your influence as far and as intensely as you can all the world over. You have now the whole field free, and you are a citizen in America and a bishop in the church without a rival. All the former little questions of local content on the church in America are now for you as nothing, and henceforth you are to consider yourself as a figure in history with no Corrigan beside you. As I say, there was a political dynamic.
My golly.
Yeah. So Corrigan, the bishop, said, they're doing it.
Yeah.
There is a rivalry here, so I don't know that you can necessarily trust what Corrigan is saying either. But
Sure. Okay.
Your dreams were for the church, but you were born for the country, and it will be through your direct labors for the country that you will later prepare greater benefits for the church. At the Vatican, of course, they did not reap all they had hoped from your intervention. It was to be expected, and the fault is their own. They never asked you nor any American until they reached the moment of despair, and then you were employed more as an instrument of their wishes than as a partner in their counsels. From the beginning, I trembled for you. I'm going to skip some stuff here. Instead of hurting yourself in the eyes of the public in working for the odious cause of Spain, you have only increased and confirmed and sanctified the confidence reposed in you by your fellow citizens. If you did what the Vatican wanted and had succeeded, you'd be looked on in America as the friend of Spain. Since you failed, you don't have this, and everyone likes you here, and so you can be influential here. And now only one word more. All doubts and hesitations to the wind, and on with the banner of Americanism, which is the banner of God and humanity. Now realize all the dreams that you ever dreamed, and force upon the Curia, by the great triumph of Americanism, that recognition of English-speaking peoples that you know is needed. For me, this is not simply a question of Cuba.
It wasn't for me either.
It is a question of much more moment. It is the question of two civilizations. Here we really get going. It is the question of all that is old and vile and mean and rotten and cruel and false in Europe, against all that is free and noble and open and true and humane in America. When Spain is swept off the seas, much of the meanness and narrowness of old Europe goes with it to be replaced by the freedom and openness of America. This is God's way of developing the world. And all continental Europe feels the war is against itself. And that is why they are all against us, and Rome more than all, because when the prestige of Spain and Italy will have passed away, and when the pivot of the world's political action will no longer be confined within the limits of the continent, then the nonsense of trying to govern the universal church from a purely European standpoint, and even according to exclusively Spanish and Italian methods, will be glaringly evident even to a child. Now the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Let the wealth of convents and communities in Cuba and the Philippines go. It did nothing for the advancement of religion. So these are the sort of letters they are writing to each other. 1898.
It's a little much.
Then they receive this letter in 1899 and go, whoa, nothing was happening over here. And, as I say, the specific opinions, if you're looking at them as propositions, are actually a little hard to find in their writings. But something's going on here. And I wish to be sympathetic to them, because while that letter is extreme,
I'd love to get a letter that's just like, all your dreams are going to come true.
yeah, it's got some fortune cookie stuff going on there. But at the same time, when you are an American, say, if you feel like the church is just being governed by the Italians and the Spanish, they had their time. Their civilization was big a little while ago. We're the big power now. Why won't they listen to us and the stuff we have to say and the way we think? Don't we have stuff that's good to give to the church? I think that's a natural frustration to have. And Leo, I mentioned, he starts off Monginque Oceani a few years earlier saying, I plainly discern latent forces for the advancement of civilization of Christianity in your country. And so they're sitting around going, well, when's it going to get started?
Yeah, although it does seem like, I know you're being kind and sympathetic, characteristic of you. But that was a joke. He's not. But
no, it's also true though. It's true in its way.
Well, it just seems like the antagonism set up is sort of beyond the pale. Like what I mean is, there, the analogy is actually, I think, more to the Francis pontificate, where and even prior in John Paul II, where that same idea that, hey, this dear church of ours is not just a Western European phenomenon and governed fully by Italians, like, is not realistic to the global church.
Right.
But you note in John Paul II and in Francis, in regards to South America, that it wasn't it wasn't spoken of in a kind of like axe to the root of the tree sort of antagonism between us and them.
Yeah. Yes, there's a bit much of that. And
granted, it's a private letter, so
it is a private letter, and it's also dealing with the war, and so
sure.
Yes, it's a bit much to go, yeah, I'm glad they're losing, because as their power decreases, they'll have to reckon with us finally. Like that's a bit much. But you can kind of see it in a way. It's, as I say, I wish to be sympathetic. It's
no, you're right.
Certainly a bit much.
Well, you're right that there's something in Leo himself that's recognizing in America a new gift that the church really needs.
And if you look at their writings, the Keene, Ireland, O'Connell, they always invoke Leo when they're doing this. They're saying, he's the one who said good things about democracy. He's the one who said good things about the modern sciences. And, they think, I think they really did think at a certain level that what they were doing was what Leo wanted. And that it was, it was the Curia that was the problem. It was the people around Leo. And there was just this accumulated weight of the way of doing things. And there was something new in the world. All that is vile, false, rotten, and mean in Europe, and all that is free, noble, and
sounds like Rousseau.
They're championing the new civilization. They say the English speaking peoples.
Not like Rousseau.
And you could read that a number of ways, but I think at a certain level, you can also be sympathetic to it. Anyone would feel this. It maybe gets a bit extreme, right? And now, finally, when the prestige of those countries go down, the other people will cease to have so much influence around the Pope, and we can finally get a fair hearing. That's the sympathetic way of reading it. In any event, Leo, it appears, did not agree that they were just saying what he said. All this blows up in France, actually starting in the previous year with the book. There was in fact a controversy in France. There was not a controversy in the United States. Mm-hmm. Why should there be a controversy in the United States about whether what the U.S. is doing is good? It's the U.S. They're doing it. But there were a couple books published back and forth in France attacking this. And then there was some politicking in the Vatican. You can find all this research. The things I've read, by the way, you can find those footnoted in this book, America and the Mystery of Christ and the Church, in my introduction. And the other books, which are good to read, are also mentioned in there. You can find all the politicking back and forth, people trying to, oh no, the Pope's maybe writing a letter, maybe we can stop the letter from coming, and then the letter comes. Mm-hmm. And this is the letter. We should talk about the letter.
Yeah, here we are.
With that background.
So he gives quite a few different concerns, fatherly concerns, about directions he sees in American thought and life. And I, in my reading here, just saw it less as like a grand synthesis and a unifying thing, so much as a selection of things to be worried about. I think in retrospect, it does seem to have a kind of spiritual unity to it, but I think it would be saying too much to say that the Pope, understood something rotten in the heart of D.C. and kind of unveiled it once and for all, something like that.
Yeah. I think we've laid out the two elements necessary for understanding the background here. And one of them is the civilizational thing. To the people calling themselves Americanists, this was about the Americanness. We want it to have its day. And the second thing is the book. Mm-hmm. And so Leo's sort of talking about the book because that's where this all got going. His first paragraph ends that this letter is intended to suppress certain contentions which have lately arisen among you to the detriment of the peace of many souls. It is known to you, beloved son, that the biography of Isaac Thomas Hecker, especially through the action of those who undertook to translate or interpret it in a foreign language, has excited not a little controversy on account of certain opinions brought forward concerning the way of leading Christian life. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a very important phrase. The way of leading Christian life. I think that is, we mentioned the propositional way of looking at heresy, or the way of life way of looking at heresy. Mm-hmm. I think this is an indication that he's not concerned so much with the fact that people are saying things as that a way of leading Christian life is being brought forward, which is not correct. Mm-hmm. I think it is important to note the way he sets this out. What does he mean when he says way of life? The rule of life laid down for Catholics is not of such a nature that it cannot accommodate itself to the exigencies of various times and places. The Church has, guided by her Divine Master, a kind and merciful spirit, for which reason from the very beginning she has been what St. Paul said of himself, I became all things to all men, that I might save all. So he's saying, yeah, you can adapt the Christian life for various times, places, and needs and evangelical purposes, and that's how we do it. We all know this. History proves that the Apostolic See, to which has been entrusted the mission not only of teaching, but of governing the whole Church, has continued in one and the same doctrine, one in the same sense, one in the same judgment. But in regard to ways of living, she has been accustomed so to yield that the divine principle of morals being kept intact, she has never neglected to accommodate herself to the character and genius of the nations which she embraces. Mm-hmm. So he's not saying we must all live according to the Irish penitential manuals of the 10th century or whatever it is. Things can change in the Church, especially in regard to way of life. That's good, that's right. Who can doubt that she will act in the same spirit again, if the salvation of souls requires it? In this matter, he continues though, the church must be the judge, not private men who are often deceived by the appearance of right. So when he talks about way of life, he's not talking about something inflexible, totally fixed, but he's insisting that where the boundaries are is determined by the church. The important thing is adherence to the church. So there are kind of two parts to this letter. He gives, as I said, the topic. Problem is the way of leading Christian life. It's being brought forward. In part 1, he talks about the underlying principle. In part 2, he talks about, what does he call it? The conclusions which have been deduced from the above opinions or principle. So part 1, the principle, he says that the church should shape her teachings more in accord with the spirit of the age, make some concessions to new opinions. Not only in regard to ways of living, but even in regard to doctrines which belong to the positive faith. So I think the proper way of reading that, in light of his other comments that I just read, is that people, at least in effect, think you should adapt the way of life to the point where it's now impinging on things that can't change, on just principles of truth. And that does mean that what you're doing is sort of implicitly committing heresy, as you mentioned.
I mean, it seems like a critique of a certain liberalizing or like loosening of doctrine in order to ease the effort of evangelization and to make the church more suited to the age rather than the age more suited to the church.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly one way of putting it. I think it's a little tricky because, of course, the church does adapt to the age,
right,
as he said.
Says, yeah.
But the church adapts to the age in a way that, I mean, the church gains stuff from the progress of the world. That's just obvious, like the printing press, you know. And yet the church has to remain what she is when doing this. So, I mean, yeah, that's the right way of putting it.
But the object of concern is the tradition, like that we can change.
But the church metabolizes the thing.
But we have to be the church.
Yeah. And like you change as you grow,
right.
But you eat the food and it turns into you.
Yeah.
You know, you have to metabolize it. So he's talking about the dangers of the present day, still in the part 1 on the underlying principle. These dangers of the present day, that is, the confounding of license with liberty, the passion for discussing and pouring contempt upon any possible subject.
I'm always doing that.
Yeah, many people are. The assumed right to hold whatever opinions one pleases upon any subject and to set them forth in print to the world have so wrapped minds in darkness, there is now a greater need of the church's teaching office than ever before, lest people become unmindful both of conscience and of duty. I mean, this is very late 19th century people. We indeed have no thought of rejecting everything that modern industry and study has produced. So far from it that we welcome to the patrimony of truth and to an ever-widening scope of public well-being whatsoever helps toward the progress of learning and virtue. As I say, Leo was the guy the Americanists were looking to and saying, he's our man. He's been...
establishing universities here.
Though this letter really made people sit back and go, oh, maybe we... like it was a shock to the system. It was sort of like, Pius IX in his own way was considered a liberal when he was younger and a conservative when he was older and all that. It's just, people felt like the church was rocking back and forth on them. Yet, so he says, we welcome all this. Yet, all this to be of any solid benefit, nay, to have a real existence and growth, can only be on the condition of recognizing the wisdom and authority of the church. I think one way of understanding that would be, and I'm taking this here from Schindler, and you'll find this in the book, in terms of receptivity. Not just to say that you got to recognize the wisdom and the authority of the church. You must submit, you must obey, you got to be governed. No, but the Christian life is inherently a receiving. There's a necessity that the form of Christian life, the way of living, one of the basic principles of it that can't be changed is that you receive. You're not just active. We'll come back to that. Now on to part 2, which is the specific conclusions or the propositions he gives. He gives 5 of them. I don't know if we want to just go through all 5. Sure. First, we should note that he says, coming to speak now of these conclusions, we readily believe there was no thought of wrong or guile, yet the things themselves merit some degree of suspicion. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'll just remark, by the way, we need a new translation of this letter. It's so important for the topic of looking at what the Pope has said to the United States, and it's just the stodgiest. I've looked at the Latin a little bit here and there, and it's just like, I mean, you could say that. Anyway, all that to say, you're going to get some stodgy quotations. Okay. You know that. You've been listening. First, number 1, opinion. All external guidance is set aside for those souls who are striving after Christian perfection as being superfluous, or indeed not useful in any sense. The contention being that the Holy Spirit pours richer and more abundant graces than formerly upon the souls of the faithful, so that without human intervention, he teaches and guides them by some hidden instinct of his own. Mm-hmm. And he goes on to say, yeah, I mean, the Holy Spirit does guide people. And that, in fact, if he didn't, it wouldn't do you any good to listen to the church, because it wouldn't come to you. It would come to you purely as letter and not as spirit. But this is the first opinion, mm-hmm. and sort of the reason people were, I don't want to say they were saying it exactly, but the idea is that now in society, we have democracy. Everyone is supposed to go act on his own initiative. And so the Holy Spirit isn't going to leave us hanging. Mm-hmm. He's going to let us do it. He's going to give us the help we need. Mm-hmm. Second point. We find those who are fond of novelty giving an unwarranted importance to the natural virtues, as though they better responded to the customs and necessities of the time, and that having these as his outfit, man becomes more ready to act and more strenuous in action. Mm-hmm. So prioritizing natural virtues to the supernatural virtues. Mm-hmm. Third, this overesteem of natural virtues finds a method of expression in assuming to divide all virtues into active and passive virtues. And it is alleged that whereas passive virtues found better place in past times, our age is to be characterized by the active.
And then he says that there's no virtue that's just passive. In rebuttal to that.
He does.
We'll go back to that. You can continue the list there.
Fourth, from this disregard of the angelical virtues, erroneously styled passive, the step was a short one to a contempt of the religious life, which has in some degree taken hold of minds. That such a value is generally held by the upholders of new views, we infer from certain statements concerning the vows which religious orders take. They say, vows are alien to the spirit of our times, in that they limit the bounds of human liberty, that they are more suitable to weak than to strong minds, and that so far from making for human perfection and the good of human organization, they are hurtful for both. Mm-hmm. And I'll remark that this has some relation, at least, to Hecker, who was the founder of the Paulus, but the Paulus don't take vows. Mm-hmm. So again, like, was it Hecker himself saying this? Was it in the book? Was it what people were saying about the book? There's some ambiguity here, but it certainly has a relation to Hecker. Finally, not to delay too long, he gets to point 5. It is stated that the way and method hitherto in use among Catholics for bringing back those who have fallen away from the church should be left aside and another one chosen. It doesn't really say as much about that. Some people think, there's some relation of that to Hecker as well, and to the Paulists. Though actually Leo wrote a letter a couple years before this praising the Paulists specifically and by name for their method of helping to bring back those who have fallen away to the church. In any event, those are the 5 points he gives. Don't need external guidance because the Holy Spirit's going to help you out. Natural virtues are more important than the supernatural. You can divide the virtues into active and passive, and the active are the really good ones. Religious life, maybe it's not so great. We don't really need these vows. We need to be active and not under obedience. And 5th, we need to come up with some new way of getting people back into the church. Those are the opinions he refers to as Americanism, and the underlying principle of them all is that we need to adapt the way of life so far that it impinges on the basic principles of Christianity to be just to the modern age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think he also says that, he describes it as a law or a trend by each one is to follow out more freely the leading of his own mind and the trend of his own proper activity. So I do think there's a implicit critique of an individualism at the basis of a lot of this. I mean, you can see it in the vow, especially a vow being a transcendence of your individual self into relation, that you willingly take on the will of the community, which you become a part of through the vow. It does seem that certainly you can see why these principles under question are broad enough that it would be hard to just assign it to one, like a very particular and notable heresy, like a particular movement of people. But as a trend, I do think that it's something that Americans historically and still are particularly tempted towards.
I should maybe say a word on the connection to Hecker, that Hecker now has an open cause for canonization. Servant of God, Isaac Hecker. The U.S. bishops just a year or two ago approved sending that on to Rome, and we'll see what happens. At the time, apparently, I haven't been able to find a copy of it, but some quotations I don't think direct quotations from it, but the Secretary of State at the time, Rampolla, the Vatican Secretary of State, apparently sent a letter to Ireland saying, well, nothing in here makes you, it means you have to say that Hecker held these opinions. But all of them can be kind of linked to Hecker, to the book at least about Hecker and some of his stuff. Like, he does have a strong emphasis on the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit inspiring each person sort of individually, and the need for people to act on their own. And I say he doesn't have the vowels, and he was associated with new ways of reaching those who have fallen away, which in this case means Protestants in the United States. And it does seem to me that, Hecker had some strange views about the way in which American culture is just like predisposed. Everyone's just going to become Catholic, that it's America is just really deep down Catholic and people don't know it. It seems to me he did have some kind of strange views on that question. And this makes for sort of the oddness of Americanism, that on the one hand, most of the people out there fluffing it at the time were, or flogging it, whatever the word is I'm looking for, we're thinking of it in civilizational terms, whereas the Pope comes back with some really like granular stuff drawn from a particular book. And yet I think you are right that these are tendencies that we have, and they're tendencies related to the civilizational thing. And you will find this in the introduction. David L. Schindler says that you can sort of summarize all of the stuff in Leo, all the 5 points, especially the first 4, in terms of activism, that you just need to do things. And I don't know if I want to summarize Schindler's whole theory, but you said individualism. For him, individualism and activism are related. Why is this? It's because the opposite of activism, receptivity and relation, are connected. You come from your parents, so therefore you are related to them. You receive yourself from them. You receive yourself from God. You're related to God. Relation is caused by receiving. But if there's not a sort of baseline receptivity and you're just out there doing, this can only be because you're not connected. You're on your own. And America's, is it controversial to say that we have an individualistic tendency?
No. And for the same reason, I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that we have a tendency to highlight the natural virtues over the supernatural. I mean, without getting into a theology of virtue, that's probably beyond me in any case. The supernatural virtues of faith, hope, and charity, the infused theological virtues, the things that come directly from God in his free gift of grace, are preeminently receptive. I mean, at some level, everything is receptive. You receive your whole being from God. But there's a way in which you can take the natural virtues as the things that you have and not the things that you receive. And I do think that there is absolutely, there's a tendency to say, okay, the things that make me admirable, the things that make me worthy are at the end of the day the things that I can point to as my property, as my individual property that belongs to me, my particular genius, my particular energy, my particular drive, my courage, etc. And not the things that I receive so obviously as gifts, faith, my hope, my charity. It just seems like that's a constant fight in the spiritual life, which is exacerbated by being American.
Yeah, and I want to look at, you mentioned, he says that virtues can't be passive. I want to look at what he says in response to this idea that there are active and passive virtues. First, he does say that such a division and distinction cannot be maintained as patent. For there is not, nor can there be, merely passive virtues. Virtue, says St. Thomas Aquinas, designates the perfection of some faculty. But the end of such faculty is an act, and an act of virtue is naught else than the good use of free will. Acting, that is to say, under the grace of God, if the act be one of supernatural virtue. So he's saying all virtues involve acting. Mm-hmm. But what does he say next? I find this much more significant. He alone could wish that some Christian virtues be adapted to certain times and, well, it's a bad translation. He alone could wish that certain Christian virtues were, he alone could want to say, let's say this, he alone could want to say that some Christian virtues are suited to certain times and different ones suited to other times, who is unmindful of the apostles' words, that those whom he foreknew, he predestined to be made conformable to the image of his Son. Christ is the teacher and the exemplar of all sanctity. And to his standard must all those conform who wish for eternal life. Nor does Christ know any change as the ages pass, for he is yesterday and today the same forever. To the men of all ages was the precept given, learn of me, because I am meek and humble of heart. Mm-hmm. Is that passive? more importantly, goes on, to every age he has been made manifest to us as obedient even unto death. In every age the apostles' dictum has its force. Those who are Christ's have crucified their flesh with its vices and concupiscences. Would to God that more nowadays practice these virtues in the degree of the saints of past times, who in humility, obedience, and self-restraint, were powerful in word and in deed, to the great advantage not only of religion, but of the state and the public welfare. Mm-hmm. So he moves from a sort of Aristotelian, Greek philosophical, well, the virtues are acts, they can't be passive, to a specifically theological discussion of Christ, who is obedient unto death, who is meek and humble of heart, and then talks about the virtues in terms of humility and self-restraint. And that, I think, is the much more important side of what he's saying here is, none of the virtues are strictly passive, but much more deeply down, none of the virtues are strictly active.
Yeah, right.
Like Christ himself is the Son who receives, who is obedient unto death.
Yes.
And
but if you've ever tried it, you will find that it's not passive in the sense of
no,
just letting it happen to you.
No. I mean, receptivity is itself an act, but I think it hasn't quite taken philosophical expression here, but he's pointed to the way in which Christianity transforms the idea of what it means to act and makes receptivity interior to it.
Right, like specifically one that you'll often hear is there's no virtue of humility prior to Christianity, because to be humble, to be earth-like,
right,
was to be trodden upon,
right,
simply.
Well, there's also no virtue of faith,
right,
or of hope, or of love.
Right.
Because you receive faith. Faith comes from hearing. Hope is trusting in what the other person will do. Yeah. And love is receiving the love from God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a passion in the Greek sense.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So they're the supernatural virtues they can't be conceived, not just because there's no supernatural, but because those things don't make sense to them as virtues.
Don't you see, though, in the Americanist positing of a separation of the active and passive, and then in the papal correction, which is not just to say, no, they're not separate, but actually there's almost, coming from the Greek angle, there's a paradox here that the more passive, the more active, and it really is. It seems like there's this overall, again, spiritual principle of divorce, and then the papal correction of marriage, saying like, okay, you cannot take our tradition, our virtues, and then for the sake of this kind of civilizational goal, separate them out into two parties, as it were, and then say, I'm going to choose for my age, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit now, just the active virtues.
Right.
The correction is to say unity, to say, no, the greatest activity is the greatest passivity in Christ, who's the obvious example. And actually, because virtue has a name and is a person, you can no longer, even without some degree of error, separate them out into sort of discrete powers that you get to pick between. It's like, no. Yeah. The image that we're supposed to imitate has been revealed, and he's one, he's unified. And so it seems like the specific reinsertion of the church, whenever the danger of leaving the church rears its head, is always to take the many and make them one again.
Right.
And that's what I see kind of going on here.
And this is, David L. Schindler has a metaphysics of all this, and the metaphysical name given to, the activism, the individualism, at root, he says, is atomism. It's that these are separate parts. Everything is a separate part. And so they have nothing to do but to exert force on each other. They must act. And so, I think the splitting up of things is very deep down. Yeah,
like when he looks at the virtues,
specifically the civilization, the modern age to which he's saying, we want to welcome your goods, as long as there is the the receptivity toward the church. It's the church who judges, because the form of the church, which is receptive, can't change.
Yeah, and he says.
I'm going to take up the book here.
While you're doing so, Leo says that in regards to the idea of natural virtues having a kind of independent, separated, atomistic existence that we can value on their own, he says even to master mental anxiety is the translation, but basically the difficulty of even having natural virtue, even to master mental anxiety, as also to preserve in its entirety the law of the natural order requires assistance from on high. So even when you posit a sort of natural order, you can't keep that natural order, as if it existed without assistance from God, without grace. And so I think there's again, just like a refusal to take the terms of divorce, of separation from the papacy here. But you were going to read the book.
There's maybe, I will. I was finding the place for when I need it. There's maybe a little bit of weakness in the Pope's language here. I mean, this is the thing that Schindler suggests, that even though he is fighting against this divorce and this sort of atomistic tendency, his philosophical language still kind of sounds like that.
Sure, because once things have been separated, you try to put them back together again.
Yeah, yeah. And so there was a need to come up with a new way of thinking and speaking, and to let, as I say, the theological, the newness that comes from Christianity's grasp of receiving, the fact that God the Son is receptive. And that's what, if you can say it this way, makes him divine. Like he becomes, well, he is the Son. There's no becoming exactly in God, but he is the Son through receiving from the Father. There's a necessity to let this Christian newness influence a little more deeply the way we think and speak philosophically. So we don't just say, all the virtues are active. It's true, but maybe there's a need to find a new way of speaking about it. And he says that that's part of what's going on at the Second Vatican Council, which we don't need to get into that exactly. But I think it is worth turning to some other ambiguous language of Leo's as a conclusion, unless you have anything else you want to slip in here.
Not at all.
And look at a rather famous passage. It's like you said, the one in Centesimus Annus, the if by capitalism you mean.
Right.
How does he conclude this letter? Well, we mentioned earlier that he makes a distinction between two kinds of Americanism, which Cardinal Gibbons just took full advantage of and said, oh yeah, we're doing the good one, not the other one. Thanks for making that distinction. Which, you probably would too under the circumstances. From the foregoing, it is manifest, beloved son, that we are not able to give approval to those views which in their collective sense are called by some Americanism. But if by this name, Americanism, are to be understood certain endowments of mind, it's anima in the Latin, which belong to the American people, just as other characteristics belong to various other nations, and if moreover by it is designated your political condition and the laws and customs by which you are governed, there is no reason to take exception to the name. I'm not condemning words here. But if this is to be so understood that the doctrines which have been adverted to above are not only indicated but exalted, there can be no manner of doubt that our venerable brethren, the bishops of America, would be the first to repudiate and condemn it as being most injurious to themselves and to their country. For it would give rise to the suspicion that there are among you some who conceive and would have the church in America to be different from what it is in the rest of the world. But the true church is one, as by unity of doctrine, so by unity of government. And she is Catholic also. And he talks about sending letters, copies of the letter to the bishops, testifying again that love by which we embrace your whole country, a country which in past times has done so much for the cause of religion, and which will by the divine assistance continue to do still greater things. So he wishes to end on a positive note. But that distinction, as frequently they do, people drove a truck through it. Not unreasonably, as I say. It was a very reasonable thing to do. But what does that mean?
Well, I have to say, as an American, it's very insulting. That first kind of Americanism is just, it amounts to saying something like, well, if by this you mean just what the Mexicans mean by Mexicanism, then sure. Which, kind of ruins the whole civilizational hopes and dreams thing of America, light of the nations.
Yeah, at least in terms of the Novus Ordo Seclorum.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you have something to offer the universal church. Thank you.
Don't we all? Yeah.
Crushing.
But I think in terms of the letter, there's a greater difficulty because he starts off with adapting the way of life to the way of living the Christian life to the customs of the people. And then he says, well, if you just mean the customs of the people, like, it's fine. Yeah. But it seems like the whole letter was also in some way picking out the way in which attempting to adapt the life to the customs of the people was causing these problems.
Which
right?
Probably must just be not just the result, but certainly seems to be hard because we're making the customs up. We're talking about 100th year of America's life.
Yeah.
So there's this way in which what obviously applies to other places, and not the most modern of nations, America, where you can say, okay, here are the customs, here's the specific endowment of soul that you're bringing to the universal church, and these are gifts, these are genuine gifts. In America, there's like this conscious argument. There's a becoming a nation right before your eyes, and claiming a particular character, and it just seems like the customs being offered to the universal church are precisely what's at issue, precisely what the controversy is about. Right. What are you becoming? What are you trying to offer to the church? So it seems to have this kind of, I don't know, unhelpful quality to it at the end there.
And it's also, doesn't the church form cultures? Mm-hmm. The church, yes, adapts to the cultures, but she also forms them. And clearly that's at some level what he's doing in the letter, is saying, don't be misled by your culture in this way or that way or the other way. Yeah. No, you have to remain within the church. You have to have the receptivity, let the church judge, as he says, or as I quoted him earlier on. We adapt, yes, but it's the church who judges what is good adaptation and what isn't. And I think you have to presuppose that when he's making this distinction. Mm-hmm. He's saying, yes, these customs, all of this, so long as it's not the stuff I said. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's not saying, and I know it exists over there without any of the stuff I said. If that were true, he wouldn't have had the letter.
He's a player in it. He's making our culture.
And so I write here, and quoting myself, that sounds terrible.
It's okay.
In the introduction, I write, on this basis, we can understand the distinction Leo draws in concluding his letter between the Americanist alteration of Christian life in its very principles, which must be rejected, and American culture and the American political condition and laws and customs, which, taken as distinct from this, the church accepts. Leo lays down the key and basic principle, subject to no compromise, that the receptive form of the church's life must remain intact. In that context, the church affirms every culture, American culture included. The church's form, as he says, the life of Christ, the Son receiving from the Father, obedient unto death, comes first, in other words, and it provides the measure of what every culture is.
Totally. That was great. Did you say that?
I said that.
Yeah, you can't be a gift to the church and try to be the church. Like you can't try to usurp the form.
Yes. As he says, with your country will, by the divine assistance, continue to do still greater things with the divine assistance.
Yeah.
I quoted him saying that the goods of the various countries exist. Doesn't he say that? They even exist. Trying to find things I already read is always tough. Well, I know I read it. But I've read so many documents from Leo here today, I don't know which one it was in.
Sorry. Say what you mean, not what he said.
Well, that's... Should we conclude this podcast by me sifting through bunches of sheets of paper?
Well, maybe instead I could ask just a closing remark here. Granted, all this, for the time in which the controversy really reared its head, I think part of its misunderstanding, or part of its just being denied as really happening, meant that the church in America never really had the opportunity to see the critique and understand it spiritually. Like there is something being said to us in particular that we need to hear as Americans. Do you think that this critique of Americanism is still relevant right now? Like, is it or is this just something to learn from in the past, and now we're on to new things here?
Well, I think insofar as what he's doing, whether he knew it or not, is engaging with the cultural dimension of the United States. The answer is yes. And I think when you look at the letter in the broad context, it's hard to read it in any other way, because the Americanists were involved in a cultural, civilizational project. And he says again and again that he's in favor of the modern this and the modern that and the new sciences. But he puts this proviso on it. And so I think that they weren't wrong to think that Leo agreed with them in a way, but they were wrong to think that there wasn't some correction needed. And when the correction happened, it happened in admittedly unclear form, but in a way that was just shocking to them too, because they were running their cultural thing as a political project, as Americans tend to do, right? Everything is a matter of political influence, and they saw a letter from the Pope condemning us as influence problem, you know? But when you can kind of get clear of the immediate context and think of it as the Pope doing his best to pick out problematic tendencies of American culture that make it hard to live the faith, the activism, the individualism, the constant divorcing of things from one another, then it remains helpful. And the passage I was thinking of, he says, "We have no thought of rejecting everything that modern industry and study has produced. So far from it that we welcome to the patrimony of truth and to an ever-widening scope of public well-being whatsoever may help toward the progress of learning and virtue. Yet all this, to be of any solid benefit, nay, to have a real existence and growth, can only be on the condition of recognizing the wisdom and authority of the church." I think it's that receptivity. Again, I don't think he just means obey the church. It's the docility and the fact that faith comes by hearing, and that Christ is himself obedient. That is the basic way of Christian life that allows all of the other ways of the times and places and the cultures to really exist and be good. I think that is what he's getting at in his letter. Yeah. And much of what I've said here today is in a clearer, more compact form in this book, and that's what the book as a whole is doing.
Yeah. I can't recommend it highly enough. Well, Reuben, thank you so much. So as we prepare joyfully for the 250th birthday party of these dear United States. We'll be talking about a few more letters to America. We have some hope or anticipation that Leo XIV will say something. It seems hard to imagine that he won't.
Maybe he'll mention this. Seems very unlikely that.
I would love an updated, Americanism address. But in any case, I think it's, again, worthy and exciting to understand ourselves as the object of papal evaluation. What a beautiful thing.
One way or the other.
Apostolic, the apostolic gaze is upon us, which is good to hear. So we hope that you'll join us as we do 3 or 4 of these, and please feel free to send any particular questions that we can address in the podcast to Reuben@newpolity.com.
Or stick them in the comments even. That'll work too.
Yes, that might work too. Wonderful. All right, God bless you all, and God bless America.
God bless America.